I stood in the hallway outside Director Vanessa Corbett's office, holding my tablet with the inspection checklist pulled up on screen. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, that persistent electrical buzz that becomes white noise after years of working in corporate buildings. Behind the frosted glass door, I could hear her laughing with someone, probably Kenneth from procurement, her favorite yes-man who'd perfected the art of agreeing with her before she finished speaking. When she finally opened the door, her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did when she looked at me. "Johanna, about tomorrow's site visit." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe in that power pose she'd probably learned from some executive leadership seminar. "I'm pulling you off it." I blinked, my finger still hovering over the tablet screen. "The Riverside construction project? I've been overseeing compliance for 8 months." "Exactly." Vanessa's laugh was sharp, dismissive, the kind of sound that makes your shoulders tense involuntarily. "You're too by the book for this. We need someone who understands flexibility. Someone who gets that perfection is the enemy of progress." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire you can't quite locate. Too by the book. As if following safety regulations and building codes was somehow a character flaw, a personal failing that needed correction. As if my job as Sunrise Technology's senior compliance officer was supposed to include looking the other way when convenient. "The inspection is scheduled for next week," I said quietly, keeping my voice neutral and professional despite the heat rising in my chest. "The site needs to meet specific criteria before county officials review it. And it will." She waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly, casual and careless. "Dylan will handle the walkthrough tomorrow. He knows how to prioritize what matters. He understands the bigger picture." Dylan Cartwright. A junior engineer with 3 years of experience and a talent for telling Vanessa exactly what she wanted to hear, exactly when she wanted to hear it. I'd reviewed his reports before, surface-level assessments that glossed over structural concerns in favor of timeline adherence, documents that read more like marketing materials than technical evaluations. I looked at Vanessa's face, at the certainty there, the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences for cutting corners. Something cold settled in my chest, dropping like a stone into still water. "Understood," I said. I walked away calmly, my footsteps measured and even against the polished floor. Behind me, I heard her door close, heard muffled laughter resume. I didn't look back. Looking back would have shown her something I wasn't ready to reveal yet. In my office, I sat down and opened my files. Everything I'd documented over the past 8 months was there, organized by date, cross-referenced by issue type, time-stamped down to the minute. Site reports with embedded photographs showing concrete mixture inconsistencies. Photo logs documenting the progression of foundation work, including several images where you could clearly see the inadequate rebar spacing. Email chains where I'd flagged concerns about the concrete mixture ratios that didn't match specifications. Warnings about inadequate rebar placement in the foundation's northwest corner, where ground stability tests had shown questionable soil composition. Questions about the modified load-bearing calculations that didn't align with the approved architectural plans submitted to the county. Vanessa had responded to exactly 3 of my 27 documented concerns. Each response contained variations of the same message: "We're monitoring the situation," or "The construction team has been advised," or "Your diligence is noted." Noted. Not acted upon. Not investigated. Not addressed. Just noted, filed away, dismissed. I pulled up the project timeline, the Gantt chart that had been revised 6 times as deadlines slipped and budgets tightened. The county inspection was scheduled for Friday, 4 days away. Dylan would do tomorrow's internal walkthrough and submit his report by Wednesday. Vanessa would review it Thursday morning, sign off with her elegant cursive signature, and declare the site ready for official evaluation. I saved everything to an encrypted drive, using the military-grade encryption software I'd installed after a previous employer tried to make documents disappear during a regulatory audit. Then I created a second backup on a personal device that had never touched the company network, that had never been logged into Sunrise Technology systems. When you've worked in compliance for 12 years, you learn that documentation is worthless if it can't survive the moment you need it most. You learn that evidence has a way of vanishing when powerful people decide it's inconvenient. That night, I barely slept. Not from anger, anger is hot and reactive, and I'd learned long ago that it makes people sloppy, makes them act without thinking through consequences. What I felt was colder. More focused. Cleaner. I kept seeing Vanessa's dismissive wave, hearing that laugh. Too by the book for this. I lay in bed watching shadows move across my ceiling, running through scenarios, calculating probabilities, thinking through what came next. The next morning, Dylan went to the Riverside site. I wasn't there, but I knew what he'd find because I'd been tracking every phase of construction like a detective building a case. The incomplete waterproofing on the lower levels, where moisture barriers had been installed but not properly sealed. The ventilation system that didn't meet current codes, lacking the required air exchanges per hour for a building of that size and purpose. The fire suppression equipment that was listed as installed in the contractor's progress reports but wouldn't actually be mounted until the following week, maybe the week after if the supply chain delays continued. I also knew what Dylan wouldn't mention in his report. What he'd conveniently overlook because pointing out problems would mean delays, and delays would make Vanessa unhappy, and making Vanessa unhappy meant missing out on the choice assignments, the visibility with executives, the path to promotion. Wednesday came with its usual rhythm of meetings and email responses. Dylan's report landed in the shared drive at 2:17 p.m. I read it twice, then a third time, taking notes. 12 pages of reassurances wrapped in technical language. Photographs carefully angled to avoid showing the unfinished sections, shot from perspectives that hid rather than revealed. Technical language that sounded authoritative but said almost nothing concrete, using phrases like substantial progress and acceptable variance and within operational parameters. His conclusion: site demonstrates substantial completion and readiness for county inspection. Substantial completion. The phrase professionals use when they mean not actually complete but close enough if nobody looks too carefully. The phrase that provides plausible deniability if something goes wrong later. Vanessa sent an email to the executive team by 4 p.m. Subject line: Riverside Project, green light for inspection. The message was brief, confident, celebrating the team's hard work and dedication to excellence. She CC'd me, probably as a courtesy. Maybe as a small twist of the knife, a reminder that the project was moving forward without my input, without my concerns, without me. I didn't respond. Silence, I'd learned, could be its own kind of power. Thursday, I came in early. The office was quiet, just the cleaning crew finishing their rounds and a few other early arrivals scattered across the building, people who either loved their jobs or were drowning in deadlines. I went to my desk and reviewed everything one final time. Then I drafted an email, choosing each word with surgical precision. Not to Vanessa. Not to anyone at Sunrise Technologies. Not through channels that could be intercepted or redirected. To County Inspector Margaret Sheffield. Direct. Professional. Formal in tone but urgent in content. Attached were my original reports, organized chronologically so the pattern of escalating concerns was immediately visible. The photographic evidence, date-stamped and geotagged, showing exactly where and when I documented each issue. The email correspondence showing documented concerns that had been acknowledged but not addressed, a paper trail of responsibility shirked. I included Dylan's walkthrough report for comparison, highlighting the discrepancies between his assessment and observable conditions, between what he claimed to have seen and what my photographs proved existed. My message was 3 paragraphs. Factual. Emotionless. Stripped of editorializing or personal grievance. I noted that I was bringing these concerns forward in my capacity as a licensed compliance officer with a legal obligation to report safety violations, a duty that superseded company loyalty. I mentioned that I was available to accompany the inspection team if they needed clarification on any documented issues, that I could provide context and historical background. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Sending this email would detonate my career at Sunrise Technologies like a controlled demolition. Vanessa would know exactly who'd contacted the county within minutes of the inspection team arriving with my documentation. She'd use words like insubordination and breach of protocol and failure to support team objectives. She'd paint me as a disgruntled employee, someone with an axe to grind, someone who couldn't handle being taken off a project. But if I didn't send it, and that building failed inspection, or worse, passed inspection and failed later when people were actually using it, when families were living nearby and workers were inside and the consequences weren't theoretical anymore, I'd be complicit. I'd be the person who knew better and stayed silent. I'd be the person who chose career security over public safety. I clicked send at 6:47 a.m. Friday morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Sunlight streamed through my office window. The coffee machine in the break room made its usual gurgling sounds. I came in at my usual time, made coffee in the break room while exchanging pleasantries with colleagues who had no idea what was about to unfold, responded to routine emails about other projects. Around 10 a.m., I saw Vanessa and Dylan heading toward the parking garage, presumably to meet the inspection team at Riverside. Vanessa was wearing her power suit, the navy one she saved for important meetings. Dylan carried a leather portfolio, probably containing his report and additional reassurances. I stayed at my desk. Worked through a backlog of permit reviews for other projects that still needed attention. Had lunch at my desk, a salad I'd brought from home that I barely tasted. The hours moved slowly, each minute stretching longer than it should, time behaving strangely the way it does when you're waiting for something momentous. At 2:33 p.m., my office door flew open so hard it bounced off the wall with a sharp crack that made my desk lamp shake. Vanessa stood in the doorway, her face mottled red, her carefully styled hair coming loose from its pins in ways that would have horrified her if she'd seen herself in a mirror. Behind her, I could see heads turning throughout the open office space, people trying to look busy while clearly listening, pretending to focus on their screens while tracking every word. Why did the project fail inspection? She didn't ask. She shouted, her voice carrying across the floor. Why did Inspector Sheffield show up with a full team and tear apart everything? Why did she have copies of reports I'd never seen? I set down my pen carefully, precisely, in the exact center of my notepad. Looked at her directly, maintaining eye contact. The project failed inspection because it wasn't ready for inspection. You went around me. Her voice shook with fury barely contained. You contacted the county directly. You undermined months of work. You sabotaged this company. I documented safety violations and reported them to the appropriate authority. My voice stayed level, calm, a stark contrast to her volume. That's my job. Your job is to support this company. She stepped into my office, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. My job is to ensure compliance with building codes and safety regulations. I stood up slowly, deliberately, meeting her energy with stillness. Which I did. Repeatedly. For 8 months. I sent 27 separate communications flagging concerns. I provided photographic documentation. I requested meetings to discuss remediation strategies. I followed every internal protocol. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed. Her expression cycled through emotions, rage, disbelief, calculation. You've destroyed your career here. You understand that? You're done. Finished at Sunrise Technologies. Perhaps, I said. But the building is now flagged for mandatory remediation before occupancy. Which means the structural issues in the Northwest Foundation will be properly addressed. The ventilation system will be brought to code. The fire suppression equipment will be fully installed and tested. The waterproofing will be completed properly. People who work in that building won't be at risk. You self-righteous, she caught herself, maybe remembering the audience in the open office, maybe recognizing that witnesses were documenting this confrontation just as I'd documented the building violations. We'll discuss this with HR. And legal. And probably the executive board. I welcome that conversation. I picked up my tablet, pulled up a specific folder I'd prepared for exactly this moment. I have comprehensive documentation of every concern I raised, every email that went unanswered or was dismissed with vague reassurances, and every meeting where safety issues were deprioritized in favor of timeline adherence. I also have recordings of our conversation on Monday, where you removed me from the project specifically because I insisted on following regulations. That wasn't entirely true, I didn't have recordings. Recording without consent violated state law. But I had emails that might as well have been recordings, timestamped and preserved, creating a narrative as clear as any audio file. Vanessa's expression shifted from fury to something more calculating. More cautious. More aware that she was standing on unstable ground. Inspector Sheffield asked me to serve as a consulting witness for the county's review, I continued, letting that information settle. Given my documented history with this project and my professional credentials, I agreed. So yes, let's discuss this with HR and legal. I think they'll be very interested in understanding how we reached this point. I think they'll want to know why documented safety concerns were systematically ignored. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Behind Vanessa, Kenneth had appeared, hovering uncertainly in the hallway. A few other colleagues had stopped pretending to work, their faces showing a mixture of shock and fascination. "You could have come to me," Vanessa said finally, her voice lower now, almost pleading. "We could have worked this out internally." "I did come to you. 27 times, in fact." Each concern was noted. None were adequately addressed. None resulted in changes to construction practices or timeline adjustments or additional safety reviews. She had nothing to say to that. No response that wouldn't damn her further. No words that could reshape the reality of what she'd allowed to happen. She turned and walked away, her heels sharp and rapid against the floor, the sound like gunshots in the quiet office. I sat back down. My hands were steady. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel my pulse in my throat, but my hands were completely steady. The next week was predictably uncomfortable. Vanessa avoided me entirely, taking different routes through the office to avoid passing my door. Dylan stopped making eye contact in meetings, suddenly finding his laptop screen fascinating whenever I spoke. The executive team brought in outside consultants to review the Riverside project, a respected engineering firm from the state capital with no ties to Sunrise Technologies. They spent 3 days at the site, generating reports that made the CFO's face go pale during presentations. The remediation costs would exceed $2 million, plus delay penalties that made the CFO's eye twitch during the emergency board meeting, plus potential fines from the county, plus reputational damage that was harder to quantify but potentially more expensive in the long term. HR did want to talk to me. So did legal. I showed them everything. The documentation organized into a comprehensive timeline. The ignored warnings highlighted and annotated. The pattern of prioritizing speed over safety illustrated with brutal clarity. They asked careful questions and took extensive notes, their expressions growing more serious as the meeting progressed. 2 weeks later, Vanessa was pursuing other opportunities. The official announcement praised her contributions and wished her well in her future endeavors. The unofficial reality was that the board had given her a choice between resignation with a severance package and termination for cause with nothing. She chose the former, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and was gone by end of business the next day. Her office was cleared out within hours, her nameplate removed, her parking space reassigned. Corporate memory is short and ruthless. Dylan was reassigned to a different department, somewhere he couldn't cause structural catastrophes. Internal audits, I heard. Reviewing paperwork. No site visits. No inspections. No opportunities to mistake wishful thinking for reality. He avoided me in hallways, ducking into offices or suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere whenever he saw me approaching. The interesting part came 3 weeks after Vanessa's departure. I received an email from someone I didn't know, a woman named Stephanie working on a different project that Vanessa had overseen before Riverside. She wanted to talk. Off the record. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office. Stephanie was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with the exhausted look of someone carrying stress they couldn't share. "I heard what you did," she said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "About Riverside. About going to the county inspector." I waited. "I have documentation too. About the Harbor Point project. Electrical systems that don't meet code." Vanessa approved the work anyway, said we'd fix it in post-inspection remediation. She looked up at me. But there was no remediation. The building passed inspection, I don't know how, and now people are working there. I flagged it. Multiple times. She told me I was being overly cautious. My chest tightened. "Do you still have the documentation?" "Everything. Photos. Emails. Code citations." "Then you know what you need to do." She nodded slowly, fear and determination warring on her face. "I wanted to ask you, was it worth it? Professionally, I mean. Was the cost worth it?" I thought about that question, about the complicated math of career sacrifice versus public safety. "I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you that I sleep fine at night. And that the people working in the Riverside building will be safe because someone spoke up." Stephanie left 20 minutes later with the contact information for Inspector Sheffield and a better understanding of how to document and report properly. I don't know if she ever made that call. But I'd given her the tools to make her own choice. I stayed in my office, doing the same work I'd always done. Following the regulations. Documenting the concerns. being, as Vanessa had so memorably put it, too by the book. About a month after everything exploded, I got a call from Inspector Sheffield. The county had completed its comprehensive review of the Riverside project. The remediation was proceeding properly under the supervision of the outside engineering firm. She thanked me for bringing forward the documentation when I did, for having the courage to prioritize public safety over corporate politics. I've seen situations where people stay silent, she said, her voice warm with genuine appreciation. Where they convince themselves it's not their responsibility or not their place to speak up. Where they rationalize looking the other way because raising concerns might cost them professionally. What you did took real courage. It took documentation, I replied. And a willingness to accept consequences. She laughed, a sound nothing like Vanessa's sharp dismissive bark. Those two. Both of those things absolutely. But mostly courage. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a while, looking out the window at the city below. Sunrise Technologies would survive this. Companies always survive these things. They'd implement new oversight protocols, hire additional compliance staff, maybe even mean it when they talked about prioritizing safety. They'd revise their internal processes and create new approval chains and add extra review stages. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd wait until the spotlight moved elsewhere and the consultants submitted their final reports and the news cycle moved on to other corporate failures. Maybe they'd gradually slide back toward the same shortcuts, the same corner-cutting justified by deadlines and budgets and competitive pressures. But that was a problem for future Johanna to handle. Future Johanna who would still be here, still documenting, still following the regulations. For now, I had work to do. A new project was starting up across town, a mixed-use development with residential units above commercial space. The kind of project that required meticulous attention to fire codes, structural load calculations, and egress requirements. The kind of project where mistakes could mean families dying in their sleep if smoke detectors weren't properly installed or fire walls weren't correctly constructed. The kind of project where being too by the book wasn't a weakness. It was exactly the point. I opened my laptop and started a new file. Project name, Clearwater Commons. Date of initial review, today. I began documenting everything from the first blueprint review, creating the foundation of records that might matter later, when someone decided that perfection was the enemy of progress and suggested we could be more flexible. The Clearwater Commons blueprints were impressive, 12 stories of mixed-use space designed by an architecture firm with an international reputation. Glass and steel construction with innovative energy systems. The kind of project that would win awards if executed properly. The kind that would generate devastating headlines if something went wrong. I spent that first afternoon reviewing load calculations, checking egress routes, verifying that the proposed fire suppression system met current codes for buildings of that height and occupancy type. The architect had done solid work. The structural engineer's specifications were thorough. But I'd learned that good initial plans didn't guarantee good final construction. That evening, I attended the project kickoff meeting. The conference room was packed, project managers, engineers, contractors, subcontractor representatives. The lead contractor, a man named Garrett Fisher, presented the construction timeline with confidence bordering on arrogance. 18 months from groundbreaking to certificate of occupancy. Aggressive but achievable, he insisted. I raised my hand during the Q&A portion. What's the contingency buffer for unexpected delays? Garrett's smile tightened. We've built in adequate flexibility. How much? 2 weeks? 4? We're confident in our timeline. Non-answer disguised as confidence. I made a note. Watched the other faces around the table, some nodding along with Garrett's assurances, others showing flickers of doubt quickly suppressed. I recognized the dynamic. The pressure to appear positive, to be a team player, to not be the person who raised uncomfortable questions. After the meeting, the new project director approached me. Catherine Wolfe, recently hired from a competitor. Mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for delivering projects on schedule. You're Johanna Pearson, she said. Not a question. I am. I heard about Riverside. She studied my face. Heard you made some waves. I waited, letting her fill the silence. Good, Catherine said finally. I want someone on my team who isn't afraid to tell me when something's wrong. Can you do that? That's what I do. She nodded, a small smile appearing. Then we'll get along fine. First site inspection is scheduled for next Tuesday. I want you there. I want your eyes on everything. Walking to my car that evening, I felt something shift. Not vindication exactly. Not redemption. Just a quiet recognition that maybe, sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't end your career. Sometimes it defines it in ways that matter. Because I'd learned something important from Vanessa Corbett, though not the lesson she'd intended to teach. I'd learned that calm documentation beats loud confrontation every single time. That evidence outlasts anger and survives personalities and persists beyond any individual conflict. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to pretend you don't see the problems everyone else has agreed to ignore. And I'd learned that when someone tells you you're too committed to doing things right, what they're really telling you is that they're planning to do things wrong and they'd like you to be complicit in it. They're inviting you to share responsibility for future failures. I wasn't built for complicity. I was built for checklists and regulations and making sure buildings didn't fall down on people's heads. If that made me too by the book, I could live with that. I could sleep at night with that. I've thought about that day a lot since then. About the moment I clicked send on that email at 6:47 on a Thursday morning. About standing in my office while Vanessa shouted at me, knowing that I'd just set fire to any possibility of advancing at Sunrise Technologies, knowing that I'd made myself radioactive in certain professional circles. Some people have asked me if I regret it. If I wish I'd handled it differently, played the political game better, found a way to fix things without making enemies or burning bridges or sacrificing my future prospects at the company. The answer is no. The answer has never been anything but no. Because here's what I know, that building at Riverside is going to stand for decades. Families will live near it, children playing in adjacent parks. People will work in it, spending 40 hours a week in those offices and conference rooms. Visitors will come and go, never giving a second thought to foundation integrity or ventilation adequacy. And none of them will ever know that it almost wasn't safe. They'll never know about the shortcuts that were planned, the corners that were going to be cut, the inspections that were supposed to be performative rubber stamps. They'll never know because I sent an email at 6:47 on a Thursday morning. That's not heroism. It's just the job done properly. It's just refusing to participate in collective delusion. But in a world where doing the job properly can get you labeled as difficult, inflexible, too by the book, well, maybe that needs to be said out loud. Maybe someone watching this has been in a similar position. Maybe you've seen something that wasn't right and wondered whether speaking up was worth the cost. Maybe you've been told to be more flexible, more understanding of practical realities, more willing to prioritize progress over process. Maybe you've watched someone cut corners and wondered if you should say something or keep your head down. I can't tell you what to do. Every situation is different. Every person has different circumstances, different responsibilities, different risks they can and can't take. Some people have families depending on their income. Some people work in industries where whistleblowers get blacklisted. Some people face retaliation that goes beyond career damage. But I can tell you this, documentation is power. Evidence is armor. And the truth has a stubborn way of surfacing eventually, whether we help it along or try to bury it. If you've got a story about standing up for what's right in your workplace, or a time when you had to choose between career advancement and professional integrity, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. This community is built on shared experiences, and your perspective matters. And if you found value in this story, consider subscribing. There are more stories where this came from, stories about workplace dynamics, professional integrity, and the complicated choices we face when doing the right thing comes with a price tag.